This is a snake plant. This is also a snake plant, also known by the mean name of mother-in-law's tongue, also called as sansiveria, but these days it's actually reclassified from the sansiveria group into the Dracenea group, but the name sansiveria still holds. Snake plants are often advertised as low maintenance, drought tolerant, and low light plants. And like all plants, they also will show signs of plant issues and stress. And today I'm going to share with you all the signs that a snake plant can tell you so that you can have a look at your plant and intervene as fast as possible to allow your snake plant to thrive. And I'm also going to answer the big elephant questions about snake plants as well. So snake plants are often advertised as low light plants. Now, do they actually thrive in low light? So snake plants can tolerate low light, but they actually don't thrive in low light. Snake plants come from Africa, so it's an area where the plant receives a lot of bright indirect light and also receives direct sunlight as well. Yes, it can tolerate low light. No plant can tolerate no light, so there has to be some source of light to allow the plant to actually photosynthesize. And so if it's in a low light condition, it's less likely for the plant to thrive because there's just not enough light for the plant to actually grow. So these are more like sun-loving plants. They need at least medium light to actually thrive, and they can actually tolerate direct sunlight. But if you're in a low light situation area and you can't get any more light in the room, then I would suggest then using a grow light and placing it in a room to give your sansiveria extra light. Now they also advertise as drought tolerant, and yes, sansiveria are super drought tolerant. Sanseverias and snake plants are very drought tolerant because of the leaves. The leaves in the snake plant actually contain a lot of water in it. It holds a lot of water. So it actually doesn't need a lot of water to survive because it's actually holding there. When watering a snake plant, it only needs a little bit. It doesn't need a lot. Also, the other part is snake plants, they have kind of like this waxy coating on the leaves called a cuticle. And the waxy coating, what it does, it prevents the actual water in the leaves from evaporating from the heat. So it's another way why sansiveria are super drought tolerant plants. And because they are drought tolerant, because they don't need much fertilizing, and because they don't need to be repotted often, it's considered a very low maintenance plant. So it's a fantastic plant for those set and forget gardeners who like to have minimum time taking care of the plant. So it's a fantastic plant in that way. So let's see what signs a sansiveria will tell you if it's having issues and under stress. So if you're finding that your sansiveria is droopy, now droopy leaves, if it's only 1 or 2 leaves, it's usually not an issue. What it is that it could occur after repotting a snake plant, and what happens is the roots may have been disturbed or there's not enough roots there, and so it can't get as much water from the soil to actually make sure that the leaves are plump. So if it's 1 or 2, it could be that, or it could be the fact that it may need a little bit more light, but generally I wouldn't worry about it. 1 or 2 leaves, it's fine. Now, if you're noticing that your snake plant has multiple leaves that are drooping, this is more of an issue because this can indicate the first sign of overwatering. And overwatering a snake plant is like its arch enemy. It's like kryptonite to Superman. Overwatering a sansiveria will kill a snake plant very quickly. And you'll notice during this video I might interchange the words of snake plant and sansiveria, but I'm talking about the same type of plant. And with overwatering a sansiveria, it's very important to make sure that it's watered properly. Like all plants, they do need water. And overwatering not only means that giving it too much water or giving it too often water, it can also be the soil. The soil, a sansiveria actually likes a soil mixture that is very well draining. It actually doesn't need to hold a lot of moisture in it. It needs more of a well draining soil mixture. So my soil mixture consists of 50% cactus soil, 50% potting mix. I also throw in about 5 or 6 pieces of horticultural charcoal in it. And the horticultural charcoal, I'm a big fan of it because it actually cleans the water when watering a sansiveria, or cleans the water for really any sort of household or outdoor plants. If you're finding that your snake plant, the actual leaves don't feel firm or plump, it feels more mushy, more soft, this is often a sign of rot starting to set in the leaves. Now, rot is usually from overwatering as well, and this can occur a few ways, by either giving your sansiveria too much water at the time or watering it too much. So everybody's household's different, everybody's conditions are different rooms are different, because it depends on where it's sitting. If the snake plant is near a area that's receiving direct sunlight or indirect light. So the best thing is to make sure that the soil is completely dry before watering your snake plant. And often in this video, I'm going to interchange the words of snake plant and sansiveria because I actually call it by both names. So in this video, if you do see or hear me interchange the names, I'm talking about the same plant. So when watering a snake plant, you want to make sure that the soil is completely dry before watering it. What I mean is that the soil needs to be literally bone dry before watering it. And if you're not sure, then give it a few extra days to make sure that the soil is dry. And with a sansiveria, I would recommend that when you're watering your snake plant there, make sure that you're watering away from the leaves. You don't want to water directly on the leaves because this can actually cause some rotting to occur. So if I top water my snake plant, I water away from the leaves. The other part is, if you wanted to, you can actually bottom water a snake plant. And bottom water just means get a container, fill it up with water, pop your snake plant in it, and wait until the water has come down to a point where the water is not actually moving anymore. It's slowly draining away and it gets to the point where it's not moving. That's the time where you pull out your snake plant, get rid of all the excess water, and that's the same with top watering. Get rid of all the excess water there, and then you can place it in your cover pot again. I would say never use a self-watering pot. A self-watering pot is more used for more like plants that need the soil to be constantly moist. Snake plants are not like that. They actually do like the period where the soil is completely dry, so before watering it. And then if you're noticing that you're finding that the actual leaves are black, well, black leaves there is surely a sign of rotting occurring, and usually that's a sign of root rot. So it's not just the leaves are rotting, the actual roots are rotting. So if you do see that, you've got to check your snake plant, the roots of the snake plant. And the roots should be like thick, white, strong roots. No funky smell, no foul smell coming out of the soil. The roots shouldn't be black, brown or mushy. That's a sign of root rot. If you do find that your snake plant has root rot, you've got to treat it straight away to try and save it. And sometimes, honestly, if there's too much root rot, you might want to just start all over again by propagating the snake plant. And to actually treat root rot, what you want to do is cut away all the black leaves, cut away also all the black mushy stems, and then use like a peroxide, like a 10% solution of peroxide there to clean the roots. and then placing it into a well-draining soil, and that way hopefully your snake plant will survive. The other part is if you're finding that more like you're getting these brown patches on the leaves. Now, brown patches on the leaves can indicate a fungal disease. Once again, usually from overwatering, because really a lot of issues with snake plants are from overwatering a snake plant rather than underwatering a snake plant. So if you're finding these brown patches on the leaves, it's usually a fungal disease. So I would use a product that has like a fungicide to actually spray on the leaves to treat that area. Sometimes I will also use clippers to actually clean and cut away that affected area, and hopefully the leaf survives. Now sometimes the leaf is so affected, even cutting away that area, there's still a risk that the fungus is still there and it's going to spread. So if you want to really make sure, then cut all the affected leaves away. If it's a tiny one, that's when I would try and treat it and cut away the area. But if it's a big patch, the safer option is to cut away the leaf. Now, sansiveria, they are sensitive to temperature, not necessarily high temperature, but more the low temperature. So if the household or the environment outside, the temperature drops to below 10 degrees, which is 50 Fahrenheit, it can cause a lot of issues with sansiveria. Also, if it's in an area where it's frosty, it can actually cause frost bites on the leaves, causing brown marks on the leaves. So if you're growing your snake plant outside, then bring the snake plant in the area where it's protected from frost. If you're growing your snake plant near a window, just be careful, because during nighttime, especially in the winter areas, if you're in an area where the winter is extremely cold, it can actually, the temperature can drop below 10 degrees, causing these brown marks on the leaves. So if you're in an area where it's quite cold, maybe move it a little bit further away from the actual window. Also move it away from things like air conditioners as well, to make sure that the actual cold air is not blowing directly onto the plant. Sometimes you will notice that there's cracks, there's also brown marks on the leaves, and this can occur by a couple of ways. The first part is that the plant might have been underwatered for too long, and it's actually made the actual plant, the leaf crack, because there's not enough water in the leaves to actually maintain the shape. But the more common reason is that the snake plant has actually been accidentally damaged. Now, what do I mean by accidentally damaged? Well, the snake plant might have been in an area where there's high traffic flow in the household, and you might have walked past and brushed it and accidentally damaged that way. The pet might have hit it by accident, or kids as well, and this can actually damage the leaves and causing these brown marks on the leaves. And once the leaf is damaged, it's damaged. You can't reverse the damage of the leaf. But it's not, over time, the snake plant will actually callus over that area. And look, it does, if you don't like the aesthetic look of that leaf, you can always cut it off. Honestly, for myself, I don't mind it. I always think of it, it's like, you know, wrinkles on the face. It reminds of life. We humans, you know, we have these marks and scars and things like that accumulate over time. Plants are the same way. They're never perfect. We're never perfect. Plants aren't perfect. So I don't mind the imperfections of the snake plants that I have. That actually reminds me, it makes them more unique. And so I just leave it alone. Now, if you're finding that your snake plant is growing leggy and long, it's actually not, the leaves aren't wide, it's not looking bushy, it's more leggy. Now, a sign of a leggy snake plant where the leaves are growing very tall is an indication the plant is not receiving enough sunlight. So snake plants, yes, they are low light tolerant, but they don't actually like to be in an area that has low light. So you need to move it into an area where there's more light or use a grow light. I myself don't use a grow light. I just find it's just a hassle having to put it on and off the grow light. I prefer to actually move the plants around my household to make sure it's receiving enough sunlight. Now, if you are going to move your snake plant to a much higher light, you don't want to directly go from a low light area where the snake plant is receiving very minimal light to direct sunlight. Because if you do that, there is a chance that the leaves can burn, especially those variegated snake plants that have a lot of cream and white through them. It's very susceptible from burning if it's not acclimated properly. So what you want to do is you want to get your snake plant, pop it into a more medium light situation. So these snake plants here sit about 3 meters away from a south facing window. So it's actually not receiving direct sunlight on it, it's actually receiving medium indirect sunlight. Then the next step is to move it into area where it has direct sunlight, and then that way it gives the chance for the plant to acclimate. And you want to do it on a slower kind of basis. You don't want to do it like 1 week it's in low light, next week it's in medium light, then third week into direct sunlight. You want to take it by each month. So you want the first month to move it into a medium light, and then the next month into a high direct sunlight, because snake plants, they can tolerate direct sunlight, especially those green type of snake plants, but you just want to make sure it's acclimated properly. And then once it's acclimated, it's all good to go. You may notice also that the tips of the snake plant is getting brown. So the tips of the snake plant, that is the most sensitive area of a snake plant. It's an area where it's the furthest away from the roots, so it's very susceptible from being not enough water in the snake plant to transport to those tips. So it kind of makes sense, because this is the further away from the roots. So this is the furthest way the plant has to transport water into that area. If you're noticing that the tips of your sansiveria is actually getting dry there, then make sure that you're more consistent with watering your snake plant, but still doing the way is that the soil needs to be dry before re-watering it. And you can check the soil moisture in a snake plant easily by either using a soil moisture meter, by also checking underneath the pot. So usually what you can do is in most household plants, you use your finger and pop your finger down and feel if there's any moisture. The only thing is you can't tell at the very bottom if there is still some moisture. So make sure that you feel underneath the pot as well to see if there's any moisture. Or you can use a stick and go all the way down the pot, and making sure that every single level, the bottom of the pot, the middle of the pot, and the top of the pot is completely dry, to make sure the soil is completely dry before re-watering it. And the other part is, if you're noticing that the tips of your snake plant is getting dry, it can also indicate over-fertilizing your snake plant. And over-fertilizing, snake plants, like any plants, do need nutrients, but they don't actually require a high amount of nutrients. And putting too much, fertilizing a snake plant too often can cause crystals to build up, which is salts building up in the soil. And what you want to do is make sure that you're only fertilizing your snake plant, I would say once every 2 or 3 months. It doesn't actually need that much fertilizing. And if you are in an area where the weather changes, like Melbourne, we have the cold winter and the hot summers there. If it's in an area where you're having a cold winter and your plant is not growing that much, I wouldn't even bother fertilizing during that season. Also, the other part is when you do fertilize your snake plant, I would suggest that whatever fertilizer you use, reduce it down to 50% of the concentration. I often find that fertilizing products, they often advertise a certain amount, and I actually find that it's too much for my household plants. So I often reduce the fertilizing concentration. So these days I use a product called Foliage Focus. Now, Foliage Focus I found it worked wonderful. I'm not actually sponsored by Foliage Focus, but the main part, just give your snake plant a well-balanced fertilizer that contains phosphorus, nitrate, all the things that a snake plant requires to grow. The other part is you may notice the tips of the leaves becoming brown because it is an area of sensitivity to actually the water. So often snake plants are pretty tough. Often for myself, I just use tap water to water my snake plant. But if you're in an area where your tap water is very high in chemicals or very heavy sort of water that has a lot of metals and things like that in the actual water, then you might want to change to something like distilled water, filtered water. And these days it is quite hard and expensive to get filtered and distilled water. So why not use a product that's used for aquariums? So for fish, they use a product to actually get rid of all the metals and the chemicals in the water. So you can use this product here to remove the actual chemicals and heavy metals in the water. And you'll be surprised you don't need that much. So I use this product called API as Stress Coat, and what I do is that for 1 liter of water, I only put a couple of drops of this product in, so it's actually very cost effective. And for this actual container, it's going to take me actually years for it to run out. Now, some people have mentioned that snake plants, the tip of the leaves can go brown because of lack of humidity, which means that lack of moisture in the environment. And I don't agree with that, and I don't think it's anything to do with humidity. The reason for that is that snake plants, they come from Africa, which is a very dry environment. It's not like snake plants come from the tropical rainforest like Maintenace do, where the environment is always moist. It comes from a more dry environment. So honestly, snake plants, they don't require any sort of humidity requirement. Normal household humidity is absolutely fine. If you're finding that your snake plant is not growing, so snake plants generally, unless it's in a very highlighted area, they do tend to be on the slower side of growing. And if you're noticing that you're not actually getting any more growth, that's also a sign that the snake plant is not getting enough sunlight. So move in an area that receives more sunlight and you'll notice that your snake plant will grow more. It also, snake plants do like to be very kind of root bound in their pot. But sometimes it can get to the point where it's too root bound, where literally there's no soil left. So certainly by checking, if you're finding that your snake plant is not growing at all, check the roots of the snake plant. Pull it out of its pot. And if you're finding that the roots are actually circling, the roots are coming through the drainage holes, then it's time to repot your snake plant. Now, how often you repot your snake plant, I can't give you a schedule to say repot your snake plant every 2 years, because it really depends on how fast your snake plant's growing, the actual size of the snake plant, how many plants are in the pot, and what sort of soil medium you're using. So the best thing to do is really just to check your actual roots on the snake plant to see if it's too root bound. Now, the other part is you may find that your snake plant, the leaves are kind of wrinkly. They're firm, but it's wrinkly. So that's more of the snake plant being too underwatered. So it actually needs more water. So maybe check it more often to make sure that it's not left too dry between watering. If you're noticing that your snake plant, it doesn't look full or bushy there, then usually what you can do with that is you can grab a few snake plants together and repot it into the same pot. And also if you're noticing that your snake plant, usually snake plants you can propagate it by putting propagation by leaves. You can also wait for this snake plant to actually propagate itself, because snake plants can grow new plants naturally from the mother plant through the root system, and you can do that as well to actually wait until the plant just eventually gets bushy. But sometimes I use that trick where I don't like the look, I want to change the look of the snake plant, I want it looking more full and bushy, then I'll grab a few snake plants and add it all together in one pot to make it look more full. If you're noticing that your snake plant and you're finding that you're getting kind of like it's not growing, it doesn't look healthy, there's webbings and things like that, just make sure that when you're watering your snake plant, also check for pests, because snake plants are tough, but they can still be vulnerable for the main household pests like spider mites, mealybugs, thrips, also aphids there, and fungus gnats. Now, if you're getting fungus gnats, it's usually from overwatering and not letting the soil completely dry between watering. And those other ones, what they can do is sap the nutrients from the leaves, causing stunted growth, deformed leaves as well. So if you do check your snake plant and you're finding these things, treat your snake plant straight away to get rid of the pests. You can get rid of the pests by just using a cloth, wipe all the leaves and then spraying it with a product like pest control product like this one here to actually get rid of those pests. Now, if you're noticing that your snake plant has deformed leaves, so deformed leaves is usually from a lack of nutrients. The snake plant is not getting enough nutrients from the soil, or it's too root bound. So it's time to give your snake plant an extra dose of fertilizer. Just still make sure it's half concentration of fertilizer, and check the roots, and if required, repot your snake plant. Also, I did forget to mention that if you do find crystals in the soil, and these crystals actually hinder the snake plant from actually absorbing water and nutrients, what you want to do is flush the soil. So to flush the soil, all you need to do, I just tend to get a garden hose and just keep on watering the snake plant to make sure that those crystals are washed away. But I would do it on a time when the snake plant actually needs watering. Don't do it when there's already moisture in the soil, because you're going to end up overwatering the snake plant. And once the soil is flushed there, make sure once again to get rid of all those excess water and then place it back in its cover pot. This type of snake plant is called a cylindrical snake plant. This one here is called a bonsil snake plant. So the leaves are more cylindrical, like tube-like in shape, rather than those flat kind of leaves. So you'll notice that this type of snake plant, if you are not consistent with watering, like if it's been left out to dry for too long between watering, the actual stem of it will shrink in, and then once it's more consistent with watering, it will come out. So this area here, what happened to this snake plant is that I left it far too dry between watering, and it affected the shape of the leaves. But there's nothing you can do about it. Once it's done, it's done. But I actually don't mind it. I'm just going to leave it alone, and it's not going to affect the growth of the snake plant. If you want your snake plant to bloom, so with snake plants, what you want to do is make sure it's getting a lot of sunlight and nutrients, and then you want to kind of starve your snake plant. So then you want to make sure that the snake plant thinks it's actually dying. So first of all, give it enough sunlight and nutrients, and then starve it. How I starve my snake plant is I actually leave it a little bit longer to dry. So if my snake plant, I know what they require, I will leave it maybe 1 or 2 weeks before I water it. And what it does is that it causes the snake plant to think it's dying, and instead of putting its energy to keep the leaves, it's going to push out flowers. And you may find that you may lose 1 or 2 leaves, or the leaves may become very sort of crinkly and not plump. And so there is a risk of that occurring, and that's how I force my snake plant to actually bloom. But when you notice that your snake plant does bloom there, then you want to go back and making sure that the watering schedule or the watering is done properly, and also give it a little bit of an extra dose of fertilizer. Because like all plants, when it actually produces flower, it actually uses a lot of nutrients, and a lot of energy from the plant is drawn out. So you want to make sure that once it starts blooming, the plant has enough water, has enough nutrients to actually maintain those flowers. If you're noticing that your snake plant, your variegated snake plant, there's a lot of brown patches just on the variegated, the white and cream areas of the plant, this is an indication that the leaves has burnt. So usually this occurs when the plant hasn't been acclimated properly. Also, variegated snake plants, those white and yellow areas are more sensitive compared to the green areas, because the green areas have a pigment called chlorophyll, and so it's kind of like a protection for the plant. That chlorophyll is used to photosynthesize, but the area of the plant, there's white and yellow, there's very little or no chlorophyll in that area. So it's more susceptible to being burnt. So if you do find that, then move it away from that light source. Put it in an area where it's more medium, indirect sunlight. If you grow your sansiveria outside and that's occurring, then you might want to put it in an area where there's a little bit of semi-shade, or put a cloth over that area where you're growing your snake plant, just to avoid that intense direct sunlight, especially afternoon sunlight. Afternoon sunlight is it's kind of very burning. It's not like soft, feel when you have sunlight in the morning. It's more of a burning, and that can actually burn the actual sensitive area of a variegated sansiveria. Now that's all the tips I have to take care of your sansiveria. If you have questions of your own, leave it down in the comment section down below, and I will get back to you. Now, sansiveria, like I mentioned before, have been classified, or the snake plant has been classified from the sansiveria group into the Dracenea group. So if you want to know how to grow a Dracenea, then watch this video here.